or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 8th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under Business and Finance are: a market rout that dented nearly all asset classes following Friday's stronger-than-expected jobs report left investors with few places to hide as they enter a new week. A consortium agreed to buy Patrick Drahi's French telecommunications operations for more than $23 billion in a deal that dismantles a major plank of the billionaire's once sprawling business empire. International businesses are abandoning Cuba, delivering another blow to the island's collapsing economy as the Trump administration ratchets up pressure on Havana. Run Amok, a media startup, co-founded last year by traditional media veterans from Hollywood and Manhattan, launched a newsletter and 2 umbrella media brands. Ireland is requiring new and expanded data centers to have their own power plants on site or contracts for new, largely renewable sources of energy to be produced nearby, helping to spare the public grid. Electric dirt bikes, or e-motos, have become the biggest source of young motorcycle riders since baby boomers fell for inexpensive Japanese dirt bikes in the 1960s and 70s. A nationwide mechanic shortage has prompted big employers, such as Ford, and philanthropic organizations to expand programs to persuade more workers to enter the trades. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. Israel conducted airstrikes against Iran in retaliation for missiles fired by Tehran, the first time the two countries targeted each other since a ceasefire went into effect in April. OPEC and its allies agreed to raise oil output in a move widely seen as symbolic, as the war in the Middle East has choked off the Strait of Hormuz, through which a fifth of the world's oil passes. Around 2,000 hospitality workers at Los Angeles' SoFi Stadium voted to authorize a strike days before the start of the World Cup. Amaryllis Fox Kennedy, a former senior Trump administration official, said she resigned last month, in part, over the lack of oversight of the intelligence community's use of taxpayer funds. Researchers said they had edited the genes of early-stage human embryos, an intervention that could help fix disease-causing mutations in the code. Ukraine launched a mass drone attack on St. Petersburg a day after Putin gave a speech there rejecting a call for peace from Ukraine. Nigeria's army said it freed 360 people abducted by the Islamist group Boko Haram in the northeastern part of the country. A 7.8 magnitude quake struck off the Philippines' Mindanao Island, prompting tsunami warnings. The picture on today's front page shows what appears to be an exhausted tennis player laying on his back with his hands up to his eyes. And that caption reads, "Court Drama." An emotional Alexander Zverev of Germany lies on his back Sunday after his 5-set victory at tennis's French Open over Italy's Flavio Cobolli. Both Zverev and women's champion Mira Andreeva of Russia are first-time major winners. And the headline, "First-time French Open winner floored by feet." The article, "The strangest French Open ends with two first-time champions," by Joshua Robinson. For the past 2 weeks, a strange vibe has hung over Roland Garros. First, there was the Parisian heat wave, then came the driving rain, and through it all, favorites tumbled on the red clay until all that remained was the most surprising tennis major in recent years. The result was a French Open that crowned two first-time major winners. On Saturday, Russian teenager Mira Andreeva took the women's title with a 6-3, 6-2 victory over the Polish qualifier Maja Shalinska. And on Sunday, Germany's Alexander Zverev finally shook the mantle of being the best active tennis player never to win a Grand Slam tournament. Zverev, 29, outlasted Italy's Flavio Cobolli over more than 4 hours to claim the French Open, 6-1, 4-6, 6-4, 6-7, 6-1. After match point, he laid flat on his back on the court and immediately burst into tears. The moment that he begun to think might never come had finally arrived, and with it he became the oldest man to take his first Grand Slam since Goran Ivanisevic at Wimbledon in 2001. Other articles from the front page follow. Israel strikes Iran to retaliate for series of missile barrages. Foes target each other for the first time since April. Trump's peace pleas rebuffed. Iran fired at least 4 waves of missiles toward Israel on Sunday. By Dov Lieber and Anat Peled, Tel Aviv. Israel said Sunday it had launched airstrikes on Iran in retaliation for waves of missiles fired at its northern regions in a tumultuous day of renewed violence in the Middle East that tested a fragile ceasefire. Israel followed through on a promise to counterattack after Iran's missile assault, despite warnings to hold off from President Trump, who said a deal to end the war was near with Tehran. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was under pressure from his political allies and the opposition to respond to the Iranian missile barrage. Iran fired at least 10 missiles in 4 waves of attacks on Sunday in response to a deadly Israeli airstrike on Beirut hours earlier, targeting the Tehran-backed militant group Hezbollah. Israel said its Air Force struck military targets in central and western Iran in response, including air defense systems and weapons, an Israeli official said. Later Sunday, Israel said it was under attack from a ballistic missile launched from Yemen, likely by the Houthis, the Iran-backed militant group that runs much of that country. No injuries were reported. The earlier exchange of strikes marks the first time Iran and Israel have targeted each other since a ceasefire brokered by the U.S. went into force in early April. The tit-for-tat threatens to escalate a conflict that has been largely contained since then, despite some lower intensity skirmishes. The Iranian regime made a serious mistake, an Israeli military spokesperson said, adding that Israel would continue its operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel said it intercepted the Iranian missiles and there were no reported injuries. Iran warned it would respond with force against Israel and its allies should Israel retaliate. Before Israel struck back, Trump appeared to be trying to de-escalate the situation, telling Fox News and Axios that he was pressing Iran and Netanyahu to stand down. Fox News said Trump told the network in an interview, "What I would suggest to Iran, you've shot your missiles, that's enough. Get back to the table and make a deal." Later, he told the Financial Times he would dictate the terms of the war to Netanyahu. The Iranian attack and airstrikes in Beirut followed another exchange of fire over the weekend between U.S. and Iranian forces, the latest in a series of skirmishes over the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway on which a fifth of the world's oil supply depends and that has become a central stage for the conflict. The U.S. military on Saturday said it shot down 4 Iranian attack drones that had been launched toward the strait, which Iran has effectively blocked since early in the war, in which the U.S. has made sporadic efforts to pry open. The military said it also struck what it called surveillance and radar sites along Iran's coast. Sell-offs elicits warnings of more turmoil. Wall Street is tested by inflation reading, flood of new shares, classic bubble stuff, by Gregory Zuckerman and Sam Goldfarb. Stocks, bonds, gold, Bitcoin. Investors enter the new week battered by a market sell-off that left few places to hide. The rout followed Friday's stronger than expected jobs report, which sheared 4.2% off the NASDAQ Composite Index, sent investors racing to increase bets that the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates by year end, and sparked a bond slide that lifted yields on treasuries to their highest levels since early 2025. That pressured shares of multinationals and smaller domestic companies alike. Gold fell near its low of the year. The tumble also drew warnings from Wall Street that more turmoil could lie ahead. Bridgewater Associates founder Ray Dalio called Friday's tumble an important move that highlights the central role that the global craze for artificial intelligence and related stocks has played in the record run. With valuations stretched and yields rising, bonds are now much more attractively priced than stocks, leaving the market in a precarious position, even after Friday's fall, he said. Market and economic concentration is in one new sector that is highly volatile and risky, and is super popular among unsophisticated investors, he said. That's classic bubble stuff. Other hedge fund managers were more sanguine, arguing that the market might have trouble digesting all the new shares in the weeks ahead, but that the economy remains strong, a fact underscored by Friday's employment data. Investors face significant challenges in the days ahead. One, a crucial inflation report offering more data that could affect the outlook for rates after the Iran war's energy shock. Another, a record public stock offering by Elon Musk's SpaceX, just one in a series of mega IPOs, borrowings, and share sales that could test investors' appetite for AI and other bets. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Employers Push Back on Weight Loss Drugs by Ray A. Smith and Peter Loftus. Coverage for Ozempic and other drugs used for weight loss has fast become one of the most coveted workplace benefits, so much so that companies say they can no longer afford to provide it. With as many as 1 in 8 American adults taking the pills or injectables, big employers from Cigna to PricewaterhouseCoopers are dropping coverage of so-called GLP-1s in droves. Others, like Chevron, are making workers jump through extra hoops to get coverage and to ensure the drugs are used effectively, such as requiring multiple weigh-ins a month, meal tracking on apps, or sessions with an online health coach. U.S. War Machine leans on SpaceX by Drew Fitzgerald and Micah Maidenberg. SpaceX's years of courting the national security establishment are paying off. The U.S. government is SpaceX's largest single client, which the 24-year-old company identified as Customer A in securities filings ahead of its planned initial public offering. Revenue from the government, which totaled around $4 billion in 2025, is set to sharply climb over the next few years. The Elon Musk-led company has combined its ability to pump out satellites and quickly launch rockets with savvy maneuvering of the Pentagon to secure high-value deals. Those agreements are putting SpaceX at the center of military and intelligence agencies' plans for space. The Space Force last month awarded SpaceX a $2.3 billion contract to build a satellite communications network for warfare systems and a $4.2 billion contract for satellites to track the movements of missiles and aircraft from orbit. Both projects were fast-tracked through the Pentagon's other transaction authority, bypassing many of the regulations that typically slow the process for acquiring weaponry and other technology. SpaceX is a much smaller company contractor than big defense companies like Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman. But analysts say SpaceX's fast-growing work with the military and intelligence agencies could eventually rival the weapon makers' space businesses. SpaceX's role in national security is now so essential that White House officials last year determined the government couldn't cancel military contracts after Musk feuded with President Trump, the Wall Street Journal has reported. They want to be the rails that all of the trains are riding on, said Kimberly Burke, Director of Government Affairs at research firm Quilty Space. SpaceX very much wants to be the backbone of the government's operations in low Earth orbit, she added. Wall Street's hottest trade, Knicks tickets. It helps to know a guy or a banker. By David Uberti and Gunjan Banerjee. Alex Todd had scored prime seats to Super Bowls, Stanley Cup Finals, the World Series, and every New York Knicks playoff game this year besides their matchup on Mother's Day. He even snacked on caviar with friends and colleagues on a chartered jet to San Antonio to watch Game 1 of the NBA Finals. But the Knicks diehard has never seen anything as crazy as the race to watch the team Monday in its first finals game at home in 27 years. A celebrity watch consultant, Todd works with a Jay-Z's Rock Nation, occasionally landing courtside seats through a friend at the agency. He knows he might not make the cut this time, with Knicks elevation reaching heights that Todd ranked just below the births of his 3 children. Instead, he will navigate an underground economy in America's financial capital where well-connected ticket brokers rule. The SeatGeek app is a free-for-all, and Wall Street is throwing around money like Knicks tickets are shares in SpaceX. To Todd, a resale market in which nosebleeds ran $8,000 Thursday is absurd. The fear of missing the end of a half-century title drought is even worse. It's hard to compete against those guys, Todd said of Wall Street. But he is confident that his plan to wait until Monday to comb through StubHub and hit up his 3 ticket brokers will get him inside Madison Square Garden. As for his budget, there's no limit, man. The cattle empire turned Ponzi scheme. Investors and bank loans fueled House of Cards beef operations, by Margot Patrick and Patrick Thomas, Benton, Kentucky. There are 2 sides of me, Brian McLean scrawled on a piece of paper to his wife. One that loves you, he wrote, the other that stole from people. For years, McLean has kept cattle here in his hometown and on the Texas Panhandle, buying calves at auction and selling them for profit 3 months later. His 80,000 head operation, powered by a $50 million loan from an agricultural bank and $120 million from investors, appeared to be a blowout success for the former chemicals plant worker. He lived in a 4,100 square foot brick home surrounded by a manicured lawn with gold-framed photos from his recent wedding in the entryway. He also had a big secret. Most of the cattle were imaginary. Once the lender got around to a physical check to count cattle and value McLean's collateral, the first full inspection after more than 4 years of sending him money, it enumerated only 8,916 animals. In the end, the rancher burned through $170 million taken in from the bank and investors, some of them friends from his small Kentucky town. He managed to placate the bank when it occasionally raised concerns about financial figures that just didn't make sense, including how his feed costs were wildly out of tune with the number of animals he claimed. And he kept his investors on board by paying out shares of the profits, which often stayed on paper as they rolled them into new investments. He made around $2 billion in cattle transactions to build his ghost herd, according to bank records filed in Texas federal bankruptcy court, which is trying to pick apart the web of alleged fraud. McLean's elaborate scheme came apart in April 2023 when a local truck dealer who had invested around $650,000 insisted on repayment. After bounced checks, he brought in the county sheriff. The rancher killed himself before the law could arrive. Now, amid suits and countersuits among the lender, bank, investors, a bankruptcy trustee, and McLean's family, details of the alleged Ponzi scheme are coming out. Leaving the front page, foreign businesses flee Cuba, dealing new blow, by Ryan Dubé, Amanda Coletta, and Deborah Acosta. International businesses are abandoning Cuba, delivering another blow to the island's collapsing economy as the Trump administration steps up pressure on Havana. MasterCard and Visa transactions by non-U.S. foreign visitors will be suspended on the island, according to Cuba's central bank. Americans already were prohibited from using their cards in Cuba. Spanish hotel giants Iberostar and Melia said they are giving up management of at least a dozen Cuban hotels each. Royalton Hotels and Resorts, a Canadian operator, ceased operations after grappling with a collapse in tourism. There is also uncertainty over the future of Sherritt International, a Canadian mining company that is one of Cuba's most important foreign investors. Its former chief executive was once nicknamed Fidel Castro's favorite capitalist. Last month, Sherritt said it was suspending operations and repatriating staff. The exodus followed several major airlines canceling flights into Cuba because of jet fuel shortages there. For decades, foreign corporations accepted the risks of operating in Cuba, seeking a foothold in the island's tourism and mining sectors, despite a long-running U.S. embargo. They were among the last vestiges of foreign investment in an economy dominated by the communist state. Cuba's economy began unraveling after years of mismanagement, corruption, and a comprehensive set of American sanctions. The situation deteriorated further after the Trump administration imposed an oil blockade following the January capture of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, whose government had long supplied subsidized oil to Havana. Philippines, powerful quake hits south coast. A powerful 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck off the southern coast of the Philippines on Monday morning, prompting a tsunami threat across the region. The quake hit at 7:37 a.m. local time, about 20 miles south of the municipality of Mazum, off the southern island of Mindanao, according to the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology. There was a series of smaller shocks in the area, including one with a magnitude of 6.7 at 8:55 a.m. Authorities in the Philippines and Indonesia issued tsunami warnings, advising the evacuation of some coastal areas. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center in Honolulu issued a tsunami advisory for the U.S. territories of Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands. Images showed extensive damage in the city of General Santos, and that was by Mike Cherney. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page. The food stamp rolls decline. Hooray! GOP reforms are paying off as more recipients work or volunteer. One of America's most acute social and economic problems is a retreat from work, especially among prime age men. So it's good news that 4 million Americans have left food stamps over the past year, despite the media spin about supposed GOP cruelty. The Trump administration's Agriculture Secretary, Brooke Rollins, noted recently that we now have moved 4.3 million Americans off of food stamp program known as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. The press reaction is that Republicans, in their big budget bill last year, imposed onerous requirements and are depriving the vulnerable of grocery help. But the food stamp program is now returning to the levels of the bad old days of 2019. Some 42.8 million Americans were enrolled in the program in January 2025, which is more than 12% of the U.S. population. The figure in January 2026 was 38.5 million. The social safety net scholar, Angela Racchiti, notes the program was due for a decline after elevated enrollment during the pandemic. That emergency ended years ago, but the rolls didn't recede commensurately. The Trump administration also holds the hardly radical belief that those who receive help should hold up their end of the social contract and work, train, or volunteer at least 20 hours a week. That's the work requirement in the program for able-bodied adults without children. Republicans in Congress expanded it to older adults who aren't yet 65 and to parents of teenagers. The requirement includes a generous 90-day grace period. In other words, those who leave the program because of the expanded work requirement do so for one of two reasons. One, their earnings increase. That's good news. Two, they refuse either to work, look for a job, or volunteer at a place like the local library part-time. In that case, the correct moral and fiscal policy is for the safety net to stop subsidizing that choice. The Foundation for Government Accountability, relying on more recent data, notes a 12% decrease in the rolls in Virginia, 6% in North Carolina, and 10% in Kansas. The flight from welfare is especially notable since progressive states have been trying to dodge the work requirements via waivers and other gimmicks. California's requirement doesn't even go into effect until this month. The administration also deserves credit for going after fraud and waste. The Agriculture Department ferreted data from 28 states and says it found nearly 186,000 dead recipients. Some 355,000 recipients were enrolled in more than one state. States historically haven't had incentive to police the program since the feds pay the bills. But the GOP budget bill will soon force states with high error rates to pick up part of the tab. These are sensible and welcome changes that 20 years ago would have been supported by both parties. The press treats every departure from welfare as a tragedy. But the real regret is that welfare programs have become permanent entitlements that too often erode the work ethic and breed a culture of dependency on government. Mark the food stamp progress as a Trump win for the country that never would have happened if today's Democrats were in power. Harassing Justice Barrett at home. The swatting incident underscores the growing threats to judges. Democrats have spent years demonizing conservative Supreme Court justices, and it's getting worse. Justice Amy Coney Barrett is the latest target of harassment that tried to use police to frighten the justice at her home in Virginia. Local police received a call on May 27th claiming to have heard gunshots at Justice Barrett's residence. The call was a fake emergency meant to send police to swarm the home of the justice and her family. So-called swatting events like this are dangerous, sending armed officers into a home where an owner may think she is facing a break-in. Local law enforcement communicated with Supreme Court police to establish it was a hoax before sending officers. But the incident is the latest in a pattern of harassment of justices' families aimed at intimidation or worse. Justice Barrett's address is public, thanks to Ruth Sent Us, the abortion rights group that published the private addresses of the conservative justices in 2022 after the leak of the court's draft opinion overturning Roe v. Wade. Progressives have since protested outside the homes of Justices Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, and Chief Justice John Roberts. In 2022, a transgender woman stalked the home of Justice Brett Kavanaugh with a plan to kill him. Prosecutors asked for a 30-year sentence, but federal Judge Deborah Boardman sentenced the attacker to 8 years in prison, about what the defense sought. Many U.S. attorneys are swamped with threats against public figures. The National Counterterrorism Innovation, Technology, and Education Center, NCITE, reported 133 federal criminal cases in 2025 involving threats against public officials, the highest since it began counting in 2013. Judges have learned to alert local police departments when they issue controversial opinions. In his 2024 annual report on the judiciary, Chief Justice John Roberts said threats against judges had tripled. In the previous 5 years, U.S. Marshals said they investigated more than 1,000 serious threats against federal judges. President Trump hasn't helped with personal attacks on the justices, calling them an embarrassment to their families after the court's 6-3 ruling that struck down his emergency tariffs. Progressives are currently attacking Justice Alito because his son works at the Treasury Department. Representative Mike Levin, Democrat from California, posted on social media that Samuel Alito's son has worked as a lawyer inside Trump's Treasury Department since early last year. The administration hid it. The public was never told. Never told? Why should the public care where the children of justices work unless it bears on a case they might hear? Mr. Levin and others say Justice Alito should recuse himself on issues involving the Treasury Department. But unless his son is directly involved in litigating the case, we'd argue Justice Alito has a duty to sit on Treasury cases so litigants can be sure they'll get a court decision that isn't 4-4. In her book, Listening to the Law, Justice Barrett writes that being the target of protest has changed my daily life, but in a society devoted to free speech, criticisms of public officials go with the territory. That's gracious and true, but it doesn't make her family fair game. Federal judges forego lucrative law firm partnerships or tenured chairs in academia for long days and a federal pay scale. Harassment and death threats aren't part of the bargain in a country that values the rule of law. From the opinion pages. A bad Iran deal could spark a nuclear arms war. To reassure regional allies, the U.S. needs to open the Strait of Hormuz and be poised to use force again. By John Bolton. Whatever deal President Trump makes with Iran, his often contradictory decisions during the conflict have laid the groundwork for more nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. If the race for nuclear weapons widens and accelerates, the region will become more unstable, heightening risks for the entire world. To prevent this, Mr. Trump and Iran's internal opposition must remove or gravely weaken the principal threat to regional peace, Tehran's regime. But Gulf Arab states and others believe Washington, hitherto their chief guarantor of security and deterrence, is in shaky hands. Accordingly, they are revising their strategies to survive in a dangerous neighborhood amid Iran's nuclear and terrorist threats. Among many things Mr. Trump didn't do before striking Iran was consult most of America's allies, not the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, not the Gulf's oil-producing Arab monarchies, and not our Indo-Pacific allies, heavily reliant on Middle Eastern hydrocarbons. This failure will haunt Washington for decades, but the most immediate effects are felt among the Gulf Arabs. Mr. Trump compounded his error of keeping these allies in the dark with his launch of Project Freedom to open the Strait of Hormuz. What went wrong is disputed, but it is disappointing that Project Freedom lasted less than 2 days. The U.S. is now assisting ships exiting the strait, but American credibility was damaged. As the conflict unfolded, Gulf Arabs were surprised when Iran attacked them. Their earlier efforts to insulate themselves from such strikes failed, stoking Arab enmity toward Tehran. The United Arab Emirates launched significant attacks on Iran. Saudi Arabia did to a lesser extent. But Arab leaders generally worried that U.S. deterrence and even capabilities weren't what they believed, further undermining confidence in the Trump administration's resolve. If America's conventional deterrent is deemed unreliable, fears about the extended nuclear deterrent are even greater. Gulf Arabs and other regional states have long contemplated whether to acquire nuclear capabilities to hedge against a fickle Washington. Since at least 2018, for example, Saudi Arabia has said it would pursue nuclear weapons if Iran did. Turkey and Egypt have had similar thoughts. While the acquisition of nuclear capabilities by Middle Eastern allies isn't imminent, questions about U.S. reliability make this a troubling long-term possibility. To develop a meaningful deterrent, no country would wait until conclusive public evidence proved its adversaries had nuclear weapons. The work necessary to establish a nuclear deterrent would have to begin long before that point. Unease about America's nuclear umbrella isn't confined to the Middle East. European allies are increasingly worried. They have heard Mr. Trump's verbal assaults on NATO and seen the diminished U.S. participation in alliance activities, as well as the possible downgrading of the level of the European commander, who also serves as Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. Low-key conversations about acquiring nuclear weapons in South Korea and Japan that have gone on for years are increasingly spilling into public view. Whenever America reduces its collective defense responsibilities, our adversaries enhance their own positions or spread anarchy. In turn, America and our allies become less secure. Isolationist skeptics view Washington's global defense posture as more beneficial to allies than to America. But we have the most to lose when our alliances weaken and global stability declines. Our forward defense policies aren't acts of charity, but are central to our self-interest. If we don't protect our interest, who will? The best way to forestall a Middle Eastern nuclear arms race is to reestablish confidence in Washington's resolve and reliability. At a minimum, that requires American action to open the Strait of Hormuz to oil and gas shipments from Gulf Arab states while maintaining the U.S. blockade on Iranian exports. Military force would likely be needed to protect commerce in the Gulf and the Strait against Iranian mines, anti-ship missiles, and drone and fast boat attacks. Force would help restore U.S. credibility and reestablish deterrence against Iranian efforts to open and close the strait like a light switch. Tehran is counting on Mr. Trump's reluctance to resume military activity, which is exactly what worries Israel and many Gulf Arabs. If Iran is left able to dominate the strait, the Gulf Arabs' economic future is endangered, along with regional peace and security. The decision lies with Mr. Trump. Mr. Bolton served as White House National Security Advisor 2018 to 19 and is author of The Room Where It Happened, a White House memoir. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The President of Vice. Trump has relaxed legal restrictions on marijuana, other drugs, and gambling, by Andy Kessler. Conventional wisdom has Democrats as footloose and fancy-free about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Bill Clinton's I Didn't Inhale and Barack Obama's Maybe a Little Blow. Republicans are considered stodgy, tiresome, moralizing prudes pushing law and order. Not anymore. Isn't it odd that teetotaler Donald Trump is our first vice president? Think about it. A guy famous for cringy dancing to the Village People's YMCA is single-handedly loosening controls on weed, psychedelics, and gambling. Is it now hip to be square? The Trump administration won't let Democrats bogart legalization and has expedited rescheduling marijuana to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substance Act, the same as Tylenol with codeine. 24 states have legalized cannabis for recreational use. The latest trend is California sober, meaning goodbye alcohol, hello disposable weed pens. Meanwhile, today's cannabis is 4 times as potent as it was in 1995. This isn't your father's dime bag. A day after Mr. Trump's second inauguration, he pardoned Dread Pirate Ross Ulbricht, who ran Silk Road and the Armory, illegal markets for drugs, guns, and other vices. In April, an executive order established a pathway for eligible patients to access psychedelic drugs, focusing on those with breakthrough therapy designation, which could include LSD, MDMA or Molly, and psilocybin magic mushrooms. On the prediction market platform Kalshi, about 90% of contracts are sports bets, low fiction gambling. The administration's Commodity Futures Trading Commission has taken a Sergeant Schultz, I know nothing, regulatory profile. Chairman Michael Seelig took to these pages defending prediction markets as derivative markets. He barely mentioned gambling. Crypto gets light touch regulation, even though it's the ultimate gambling market. The CFTC recently vacated a $5 million Biden-era settlement with the Winklevoss twins, Gemini, for making false statements. Mr. Trump even pardoned Binance founder Shapeng Zhao for violating anti-money laundering laws. Binance exchanges funneled $1.7 billion to Iran. Speaking of vices, it's worth mentioning that OnlyFans was founded the same month Donald Trump was elected in 2016, and its sales are approaching Hollywood's domestic movie box office. Maybe all these changes were overdue, but isn't it bizarre that they happened under a Republican administration? Alarmed, the administration is saying, don't worry, be happy. But nothing comes free. Please don't call me a prude. I'm in the do what you want, but don't bother me camp. Still, they're called vices for a reason. Don't be naive and assume there aren't costs. Since the commercialization of cannabis for those 21 and older, studies show a 6% increase in injury crash rates and a 4% increase in fatally crash rates. A Mass General Brigham study found an almost fourfold increase in cannabis use among 12 to 17-year-olds presenting for a psychiatric emergency since 2018. Another shows a clear age-related association between cannabis use disorder and subsequent psychiatric disorders diagnoses. That's harshing my mellow. Oregon and Colorado have legalized supervised use of psilocybin, and New Mexico is close to implementing it for medical use. These substances will leak out and everyone will have access. A friend of mine who grew up in Palo Alto, California, told me a story. In the early 1960s, LSD, on its way to a local Veterans Administration hospital where experiments were taking place, fell off the local pharmacy station wagon and into the wild. Yes, the same ward where Ken Kesey wrote, "One flew over the cuckoo's nest." Gambling addiction isn't a small problem. A survey found that half of men under 50 have sports betting accounts. In 2024, 10% of men under 30 had a serious gambling problem. I bet it's even higher now. While OnlyFans makes for cutesy sex worker plot points on HBO Euphoria and Apple's Margot's Got Money Troubles, society hasn't come close to dealing with addiction issues. We've seen the negative effects of vices, psychological, economic, and family dysfunction, underemployment and unemployment, children to foster care. And that's with drugs being illegal. We keep fentanyl off the streets because people are dying. But where do we draw the line? These vices will damage a growing portion of society. I worry about a lost generation. Again, I'm not a Puritan calling for prohibition, but increased funding for education programs will be needed, and they'd better not be lame. We all laughed at the film Reefer Madness shown in high school. Even the fried egg, "This is your brain on drugs" public service announcement was more likely an encouragement than deterrent. More treatment for those addicted is also inevitable. But even today, many refuse to admit that our homeless problem is really an addiction problem. Maybe that will point to smarter solutions on how to combat both. Meanwhile, for all you midnight toking Trump haters getting buzzed, baked, and blazed, admit he's your best bud on this one. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 8th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.